Well, hey, thanks for joining us today. My name is Gabby Hartzell. I am the director of The Well, and I have my friend here, Mary Lou Casada. She is also on the leadership team with The Well, but she is a wife. She's a mother of three, a business owner. So around here, I've heard a lot of women just asking questions about this thing called parenting and trying to get a handle on it, if that's even possible. So I thought, who better to bring in than Mary Lou to give us some wisdom and advice and thoughts on the subject.
Well,
So,
good luck on the wisdom part.
so just first off, real simple question, Mary Lou, what would you do differently?
Oh, my word.
Just kidding. We can start with something easier.
Right. No, that's actually a good question because my mother was a very wise woman, and she gave some very wise advice, and that is that you do the best you can with what you know at the time. And so when I look back on, oh my word, 27 years of parenting, I realized that there were mistakes that I made, but there is grace for that. That there are things that maybe tiny things that I could have done differently, but I did the best I knew at the time. So I give myself grace for those things and understand that in the big picture, God has my children. And even if I was a total screw up, He has the power and the ability to bring grace out of that. So I give myself grace.
Well, that's encouraging. And I say a lot of us don't do that. Or we criticize ourselves or look at others and compare and think, man, we could have been doing this. So what do you think has been the hardest part about parenting?
Hardest part, consistency. And as frail human beings, we're not always consistent in life. And so when it comes to shaping, the life of another person, which is what parenting is shaping the life of another person. Right. No big deal.
No
right. Being consistent. It's so funny. We had a chart. It was big in homeschooling back in the day. It was called the if-then chart, and it helped us be consistent with discipline. So if you spoke out of turn, if you said something ugly to your brother or sister, then you might get this particular consequence. And so we we used that as kind of a guideline for the children to know what the consequences were, and for us to be consistent with discipline and with parenting. And it's kind of funny. We only had two things that our kids got spanked for. We were spankers, but it almost never happened because there were only two things that they got spanked for, and that was disobedience, because we wanted to teach them obedience, because if they obey us, they'll obey God. And so obedience and disrespect. And it was funny, when Emily was nearly grown, she said, I figured out something. Everything is disobedience and disrespect. And so I feel like we did a pretty good job of that with some guidance, that we kept the main thing, disobedience and disrespect were the two primary values we wanted to instill. Everything else was small potatoes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so you all have been married for how long now?
What year is it?
What year is it? 2017, I think. I don't know.
30 years. Wow. 30 years in September.
So how are you able to, sometimes I think it's hard for women to really balance, like when a child enters the family, balancing and making sure that your husband doesn't get lost in the priorities.
Right.
So how did you prioritize, or maybe how would you have done it differently, but how did you prioritize marriage above kids in that?
We sit down before Emily came into the world and made some decisions about that. I don't know how we were so wise. Looking back, that was a smart thing to do. We agreed to be a united front. There was no mom-dad interplay. Our children couldn't play one against the other. So we were a united front. And any big decisions, we made them together. And we always understood that our kids would leave us. They're going to go make lives of their own.
Hopefully.
So, right. So our job was
leave.
to equip them to go out and live a life, and that we would remain. So while they were a priority to us, always in the back of our mind was the idea that we're stuck with each other till death do us part. And so we better keep that in the forefront, right? Because that's going to last longer, God willing, than our time at home with our children. Yeah. So it was a decision, and it's something that We didn't have the money early in our marriage for like date nights and those kinds of things, but we had our time, and we closed the door for our bedroom, and knew that that was time just for us.
Mm-hmm.
And that our children didn't share a room or a bed with us, because that was our time. They learned to go to sleep on their own. We never neglected. We loved and rocked and did all those things, but they were separate from us.
Mm-hmm.
Always in our mind is that our children are separate than us.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Somebody once told me with marriage counseling that, your kids are think of it as like a guest in your home, because they're only there for so long.
Only there for so
long. They're not there forever. So would you invite a guest into your bed? No. Probably not. That'd be weird.
That'd be strange.
I wouldn't have any more guests at my house, that's for sure. So with talking about priorities,
mm-hmm.
how were you able to prioritize God in your life and your family, and to model that for your kids and make a priority for them?
For us, homeschooling helped. I didn't grow up with family devotions, although I saw my dad engaged in the Word, and I think Jeff's life growing up was very similar. Church was our social world. That we went to church every time the doors were open, and all that growing up. Jeff mm-hmm. and I both. And so for our children, we didn't know that you could have like a devotion time or any of those kinds of things. So we didn't have that routine. But because we homeschooled, Bible was part of our curriculum. Mm-hmm. And so we spent time together in the Word. And so that helped, I think. But we always understood that our relationship with God, and our children understood that our relationship with God was priority, because those activities took priority over everything else. So Sam, my oldest son, was involved in Little League when he was a child. And if there were games on Sunday, that was lower priority than church activities. Mm-hmm. So we made sure that they understood that cultivating our relationship with God was number one over any other activity. And we kept that. Even though he was on the all-star team, if that was going to take him away from church, he had to miss. And he was cool with that, interestingly enough, because we were like, you're doing a favor for God. This is something you're doing for him, and he will bless you. And so we had those kinds of conversations all the time about making that a priority. Yeah. But also, there's a great scripture in Deuteronomy that says, as with your coming and your going, that you talk about God. And that's what we did. God was just a part of our life. It wasn't spiritual life over here. Yeah, it was that our spiritual life is a part of our whole experience and existence. Mm-hmm. So it was never compartmentalized. It's just what we do.
Yeah, that's similar to with my upbringing. I mean, I had a single parent, and mm-hmm. and we didn't really talk about devotions or mm-hmm. Spending time reading. And she did talk about that, but we never really practiced it much together as a family. Right. Mm-hmm. But it was always a part of conversation. Mm-hmm. God was always part of it. We always prayed together in the mornings on the way to school. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of instilled in that way.
Right.
Which I found obviously helpful.
Yeah.
In my older age, yes.
For sure.
What do you think the best thing that you did because you and your kids have a great relationship?
Thank you.
Unfortunately, not everybody does. And so what do you think was the best thing that you did for your relationship with your kids?
We promised them honesty, for one thing. We never shied away from hard truths, even about ourselves. Our children were probably the only kids in our whole circle that knew Santa Claus wasn't real. Because we promised them we would never lie to them.
I hope your kids aren't watching this.
I know, right? And then conversation. I mean, and we talked. And then as they matured, we gave them more and more leeway. We were not permissive parents by any stretch, and we were pretty strict parents. But we empowered them to make decisions, and we talked them through decisions. Mm-hmm. I can remember, if I could tell a story on Emily, she came home from college. She came home from college, and her grades had started to drop. And her college was a big financial investment for us. And I had a conversation with her about some of the people she was spending time with, because that circle of friends was not the best for her at the time. And in that conversation, I was like, Emily, you can't hang around these people because your grades are failing, and this, the activities and the things that you're doing are not going to be conducive to you being successful in college. And she told me as a 19-year-old, you can't pick my friends. And you know what? I can't. I can't pick your friends. I can't choose your life. That is your choice. But there are natural consequences that come with your choices. And if you continue on this path, we're going to bring you home to community college. You're not going to stay where you are because we can't afford to invest money in you that you're going to waste.
Yeah.
It's your choice. We're going to love you no matter what, but it's your life and your choice. Her grades came up and she was extremely successful. But we've always been like this. You have some options here. You make a choice. Yeah. She had a dating relationship early on in college that was very volatile. And I was worried about abuse, verbal abuse. And I had that conversation with Emily to say, is this the way you want to live your life? Can you see what the future will hold? I'm not going to pick your man. She picked a good one, by the way. She picked a good one. But I can't. I have no control over that. So we tried to empower our kids to make decisions that were wise, think it through. And we gave them rope, probably in their mid-teens, to start doing that. Will had a Boy Scout thing, and there was something going on at church, and I'm like, what's your priority? What's your priority? Make your choice. And he chose to come to night of worship instead of a Boy Scout activity. So empowering them to make those kinds of decisions, then they're free and independent, and they come back to us for advice. So that's how we've cultivated that relationship. Yeah. So as grown children, Emily and Will know that they're going to be free to live their lives without our interference, but we're there to love and support them in their adulthood. Yeah. And we laid the groundwork for that early with honesty and conversations. I talked about age appropriately, of course. I talked about sex and love and marriage and relationships and money and all those problem areas sometimes. We talked about them all the way through from the time they were little with complete honesty. So if our kids asked us hard questions, did you have premarital sex? What about this? What about that? We were very, very honest and said, don't make the mistakes we did. We're going to guide you through this thing called adulthood. Does that?
Yeah. So now that they are pretty much all adults there,
right?
How do you stay connected with them now?
We don't have anything formal in place. We're friends. I don't know. We're just friends. Still parents in that we know them better than anybody else on the earth, and still try to offer guidance along the way, but not in a pushy way.
How did you make that transition? Because I think sometimes people either are just friends the whole way through,
right.
Or
which isn't always effective.
You're the parent the whole way through, right, and they can't ever make that transition when their kids grow up of becoming a friend who offers guidance and wisdom.
Right. It's a choice. It's a decision.
A hard decision, I see.
Yeah, somewhat. If your life is in your kids, it's a harder thing to let go. And so we never did that. Our children were our focus because they were a gift from God, but that was not our whole life. Yeah. It was never our whole life, ever. And so cultivate the things that put joy in your joy jar, cultivate the things that you can do. You mentioned business owner. I started a business about 5 years ago because I knew in 5 years I would be an empty nester. And so I made preparation for that time so that I had a life and I could let them live their own life. Ultimately, I'll stand before God as a parent, but they will stand before God for the life they choose to live. And I have no control over that. Yeah. And so when you start meddling in things you don't have control over, you get major stress in your life and you shorten your own life. I want to live as long as I can. Yeah. So I don't stress myself out. If they make a decision that I don't agree with, I'm going to say, I think you'll find that this is going to work out badly for you, but it's your life. Choose, what is it from the old Raiders of the Lost Ark? Choose wisely. Choose wisely. So that's we let them choose because ultimately they are responsible for their choices. We raised them. It's on them now.
It's all you now.
That's all you.
So if you could only give one piece of advice to moms or moms to be, what would you say?
Vision, vision. Jeff and I, and again, this is so much grace. We weren't smart enough to know this kind of stuff. We just kind of did it, and God is so good to have done that for us, because we could have screwed it up big time. But we had a vision for what we wanted our kids to be. We wanted to be independent and strong. We wanted to be people of faith. We wanted them to be people of influence. And so every decision that we made as parents came back to that reality. What will this do to them if we let them choose sports over church activities? How will that affect the outcome? So every decision we made came back to that vision. We want our kids to be godly, independent, successful, wonderful people. And thank God they are, in spite of that. But that was in spite of us, but that was our vision. So you got to map it out and then let every decision you make as a parent come back to that vision for what you want them to be.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. If you have any questions, more topics that you want to hear about through these video blogs, then you can just email us at thewell@thecreekchurch.com. We would love to hear from you, love to hear comments and questions. But we'll be checking back with you soon.